Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. So, this is just, if you can notice from the last video, this is just like a couple of minutes in. So, I have come back to talk about what I forgot. I think this is what I forgot. I'm not really sure, but breaking down the problem, making a simple blueprint. So, I have done some playlists in my YouTube channel so far, but I don't recall talking about this blueprint idea that I have in mind. So there is a YouTube channel. It's an Arabic YouTube channel for Mahmoud Ahmed, I think. So he has this idea. I don't know if it's actually him, but I know that is actually he read it from a book, I think, but it's from his channel that I have seen this idea, and I am thankful that I have watched this. I'm grateful, or I don't know the word. I don't really do the thanking talk too much, so I'm just grateful and then move on. So what I want to say is this blueprint thing have been introduced to me from his channel. So the idea is, think about, okay, let's just delete this line for now. Think about, for example, about stuff that you, or about functions that you are gonna need in your application. First of all, let's break the problem down. So breaking down the problem, making a simple blueprint. And what I mean by this is building this simple, like we have said above here. We can start by making the most basic version of our application, and by doing that we need to think about what is this application. It's a Dojo manager system, so it's all about students and the teacher. We can think about the teacher if we are gonna use a username and password, if we to let him log into the system, but other than that the teacher is not important that much. So the student should be should take our attention here. So this is an entity, student. So this, because this is a GUI application, this should have a presentation in the UI, which is user interface. Now you know what that means. Let's move on. And the database. So you already know, or you must already know, that we're gonna use MySQL. If you don't know what that means, take a 7 hours video. I saw that on YouTube. Actually, databases are easy, so they're easy to learn as far as I know. It's just some tables that you have entities, you have foreign keys. So let's not talk about that right here, and let's move on. So we have this entity, students. Now our application should have some relations to these students, because all we do, our application should do, is to save students. For example, we can check, for example, check for students attendance. So that's need to be, that should be in the database. So if you really think about it, it should be saved. Anything that needs saving, it needs to be stored in the database. So storing is the word that we should use, or saving. I'm gonna use those exchangeably. I don't know the word. Okay, exchangeably is what I'm gonna use here as well. So we can save students, check for students attendance. We can delete and add students. So you can just say CRUD students, like we have said above, if you remember. So that's it. So, and by the way, this attendance should be an entity as well. This is an entity right here. If you think about it, this is an entity, because this needs to be its own table. If you know a little bit of MySQL so far, you should know this. So this is attendance. and there we have a relationship, so we are gonna explain the relationship by asterisk for now, or let's use the symbol. This symbol is good for asterisk. This is actually what we use in C. For example, in C lang we use this to return the address of something, or some variable. Yeah, you don't care about that, do you? But I'm just telling you. So this asterisk here, oh no, this is not an asterisk, this is an ampersand. No, we are gonna use this. It's on your keyboard, look for it. Okay, so we're gonna use this symbol to represent relationships in our database. So we have a relationship between students and attendance. Okay, attendance, that's right. So you can say that the attendance is gonna have, it's gonna have the students primary key as a foreign key. So you should actually know what this means, but I'm gonna go into explain it. So for example, let's say that the student in the database, we can represent the student in the database this way. Let's have some space in here. So let's say, okay, so let's make this, let's do this here. So let's say this is our database. So this is our database. Let's name it Dojo database .sql. No, that's not. I'm just gonna represent it. So let's say we have a students table. This is a table, and we have an attendance table. Attendance, that's another table. Okay, in students table, you need some columns or some data that you need to save on students. So this is a students table, but it doesn't have anything in it. So you need to actually have it, give it something that it needs to save or it needs to represent, because this is a data about an entity that this table basically is gonna represent. So for example, you can think of this as a bottle, and that bottle has a name of water, for example. So our entity here is water, and what that contains is water. So water here should be some first name. For example, let's say this has a first name. This has a first name. I am bad with analogies, just to give you that. So first name, last name, first name, last name. Let's say this is okay, so we need to have an ID first. So each item on the table should have an ID. So let's have the student ID. Okay, and let's have some comments in here. This is this what I'm gonna write here is for a primary key. So this is the primary key. This PK stands for primary key. You guessed it right. This first name isn't anything. So, and this should be auto incremented. For example, auto increments. You can Google simply all of what this does, or you can go and take some video that refreshes your MySQL memory or knowledge or whatever. I'm just gonna explain this so I do some practice myself. So first name, this could be just some var character. It doesn't have anything to do with the attendance table, so I'm not gonna go and explain it. So we have the primary ID, the first name, and the last name. So this is actually a number or an integer. Okay, and this should be a character, so we can use characters. We use characters to write first name, so this should be varchar. Okay, and characters, if you want to write characters, you can use varchar, and so as the last name. If you want IDs or numbers, you can use an integer, and this integer in MySQL we are write it this way. Okay, so you just go ahead and see how you write tables in MySQL. Like I've said, you need to actually review your knowledge. So what I want to do here is just simply explain the relationship that the student and the attendance might have based on what I have introduced here. So the attendance itself could have an attendance ID, which should be exactly an integer. You guessed it right. Repetition is key. Remember, repetition is key, and practice makes you understand stuff. So this is a primary key of this table. Each table in the database needs to have a primary key. No matter what its name, what it does, it should have a primary key. So primary key, this should be primary key. You already know what this stands for, but we are going to do this anyway. So auto increment. And by the way, if you don't understand what auto increment means, make sure you Google that as well. But I'm gonna go and explain it anyway. Basically what it does, for example, when you are gonna insert or give or create some new student, you don't want to have to manually give it an ID, because you might not remember what the last ID was, and there you go. So that auto increment automates the job for you. It just gives them like it gives them special or unique, yeah, that's the word. It gives them unique IDs or unique primary IDs. It creates unique primary IDs, so you don't have two primary IDs you don't have one primary ID for two students, or maybe more. That should be terrible, or that could be terrible. I think that was their problem. So they created auto increment as a function. So if you can look it up, I bet you that's the problem for it. For example, you can think of anything you don't want to you want to understand. You can just look it up on Stack Overflow or something like that, and you can, if you really stop for a moment and think about it, for example, auto increment, like I've explained it to you, you can think about, oh, this auto increment is, for example, a solution for automatically creating IDs for people. So they should have had this problem in the first place. Otherwise they shouldn't have, or they couldn't have, or they wouldn't have think or use this auto increment as a function everywhere. So you can predict some things like that. You are gonna develop this sense of pattern or some things like that as you go along, but only if you learn more than one thing, or if you learn more than one technology, is what I want to say. So attendance table has a primary key or an ID that is a primary key, which is auto incremented by MySQL itself, because MySQL is what uses our SQL file here. So you can think about what I'm writing here, from this on out, this into here. This is, for example, an SQL file. So MySQL uses this in order to create a database in the memory or something like that. So actually, I don't know where it creates it. That's, yeah, you have to Google that as well. So attendance ID, yeah, another thing or another column that we can have in here should be attendance ID. Yeah, okay. So status, whether, for example, the student was present or absent. Présent, absent, that's French. So status and the student ID. So you kind of need the student ID. So now here we have student ID here in the attendance table. If you can notice that, and you have student ID in the student table. Okay, so I did something. We don't